Okay, so I wanted to just give a few minutes before we start our first panel, just to talk about the theme of our summit. And our summit is about cultural justice for tribes. And the reason the planning committee chose that theme of cultural justice is because ever since, at least in California, ever since 1769, when Father Serra first arrived in San Diego to establish the first mission, there has been no cultural justice for tribes. So we are talking about centuries in which California's indigenous people have had to deal with colonization, had to deal with strangers coming into their lands. And Father Serra was in Southern California, but in the most northern coastal reaches of California, there were also Russian fur traders and other colonizers. And ever since those times, tribes have been fighting for justice. And given what we are going through in this country right now, where there has been a new awakening, it seems, among people about so much of the civil injustice that's happening for communities of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color throughout the United States. A lot of eyes are opening to the fact that the civil rights era may have been 40 years ago, but the civil rights battle has still not been won. And for a lot of people like me, white people, this eye-opening is a little surprising. It's a little uneasy, because for the people who are suffering under injustice, this isn't eye-opening, this is life. This is the way it's always been. So for us to say that, suddenly we're realizing what's been going on is actually, to me, it's embarrassing. We shouldn't be just now realizing that there's still so much work to be done, that there are still so many things that need to be changed. And in my work, I've been working in Paula for 16 years almost, and started coming here as a volunteer 20 years ago. And I have learned so much, and the longer I'm in this job, the more I learn about what still needs to be done. And that's why we wanted to make this conference focus around that theme of cultural justice. We are still fighting with the agencies. We are still fighting with the governments. And we've made a lot of progress too. We have a lot of allies. We have people who understand that they have an obligation to the tribes, whether it's federal trust responsibility, whether it's following the regulations that have been passed for protection in California, the SB 18s, the AB 52, the Resource Protection Ordinance here in San Diego County. So those allies are there, those regulations are there, but are they being followed in a way that promotes justice? Are they being enacted in a way that really gives the tribes the voices that they not only deserve, but that by law they are entitled to? So we bring you here as an audience. We bring you here as participants, members of tribes, people who work for tribes, and those who are representing the agencies to consider this question. Where are we with cultural justice for tribes? What do we still have to do? Why are we still having to fight for the rights that the tribes already have? And how are we going to continue to do the work to protect what's left when so much has already been lost? So those are the questions I want people to be thinking about. And I apologize that I'm the one to put them out there, because I am not a tribal person myself, but I am dedicated to this work. And I want to see good things come from all of our interactions together not just over the next 2 days, but in all of our meetings. So agency folks, panelists, just be ready. If somebody shouts, if somebody gets a little hot under the collar, just remember that that's 2+ centuries of anger and frustration. And it's probably not about you as an individual. I won't speak for everybody. I know some people are like, ugh. But just have patience with that and take a breath and realize that frustration is understandable, and it's not about you as an individual. It's about just having these necessary and sometimes difficult conversations. So with that, I thank you again all for being here, and it is 8:30, which means that it's time for our very first panel, which is our ACHP and federal updates panel. So for that, we are going to welcome Blythe Semmer from the ACHP and Reid Nelson. And I would ask that everybody who is not on the panel, please go ahead and turn off your video. And that way we can focus on Blythe and on Reid for this morning's opening panel. And if either of you have anything to share on your screen, you have that screen sharing capability, so take it away whenever you're ready.
Very good. Thank you, Shasta. I very much appreciate you inviting us to be part of this, and it's great to see many of you. I can't see you quite yet with your video off, but it's just really nice to be with you all today. I really regret that we can't be there in person. These sorts of meetings and interactions are some of our very favorite things to do. So I regret not being able to be there, but it's nice to be able to talk to you today and to share a few things that we're working on that I think are of interest to the members here, and also to leave plenty of time to just hear questions and concerns and thoughts from you all. Again, my name is Reid Nelson. I'm the director of the Office of Federal Agency Programs here at the Advisory Council. I am speaking to you from Washington, D.C., but in my heart and in my mind, I'm out herding sheep on the Navajo Reservation with my in-laws. If you can see the background screen, that's sort of where I am sentimentally right now. So I just wanted to say a few welcoming remarks and then also turn it to Blythe Semmer, who can introduce herself. And she'll start off with a few things, and Blythe and I are just going to kind of go back and forth on a couple topics. So Blythe, I'll turn it to you.
And Reid, real quickly before Blythe starts, I also, just looking at my agenda, can't imagine why I would ever forget Dr. Valerie Grussing, who is also on your panel from NATHPO. For some reason, I got it in my head she was on the next panel. But Valerie, sorry about that. Yeah, please. Oh, and great to see you. And I believe you're on vacation as well right now. So I really appreciate you taking time out from your vacation to be on the panel. So sorry about that. But so Reid, thank you. Blythe, you're next, and then we'll go to Valerie.
Thanks, Shasta, and hi to Valerie too. Yeah, I think I was going to start and talk a little bit about kind of how we're doing things a bit differently during the pandemic, and that to me seems like there's a little object study, is that, you know, we're all on different screens and we have to coordinate that way. But hi everybody, I am like Reid, excited to be able to join you today and really appreciate the invitation to come and join in the meeting. I'm glad that you all get the opportunity to do this, and glad that we could be a part of it. I work in Reid's section of the Advisory Council, the Office of Federal Agency Programs. My title there is Senior Program Analyst, which doesn't tell you a whole lot, but I work with a lot of this kind of policy and guidance and interagency coordination things we do. So I thought I would just quickly talk a little bit about kind of, you know, the aspect of our work that we're all dealing with in different ways all day, every day right now, which is, you know, kind of adapting to COVID-19 and the pandemic, to kind of let you know what ACHP's been up to this year. We have, since March, been working really actively with federal agencies and really all the participants in the 106 process to try to give the best advice we can for how to, continue handling our work in circumstances that we didn't truly anticipate in any way. So in that way, you all may have tuned into the information. We've been trying to keep our website updated with news and, current, whatever the most up-to-date advice from ACHP about kind of working with Section 106 during COVID-19. And the substance of that has been encouraging and advising federal agencies to, to prioritize the projects that are most important to them or that are critical during this phase where all of our work environment may be, shifted a little bit, and also continually encouraging them to exercise flexibility on timelines, particularly in the early phase while many SHPOs and THPOs, kind of had to pause reviews for a while because in some cases offices were entirely closed or shut down, and they had no ability to respond to requests for Section 106 review. Fortunately, it appears that some of those pressures have eased somewhat, and agencies, SHPOs, THPOs, tribes as well seem to be finding ways to kind of work within these new constraints of the pandemic. That doesn't mean that we've all gone, back to full speed normal in every respect. But folks are kind of, working with telework and other ways to try to still move the work. So we are seeing things largely continue to proceed now. Agencies are doing things more like exploring using virtual meetings or other ways to try, other formats to try to offer access to consultation without physical proximity, which again might not always be our first choice, but they are, they're trying to find ways to do it. And ACHP is likewise strongly encouraging agencies to use whatever means they have at their disposal to facilitate the meaningful participation of THPOs and tribes in consultation in these circumstances. So we're, again, trying to encourage flexibility on all sides and help people on a case-by-case basis when they have questions about how things are going, if they may be affected by COVID reviews. We don't have any means for formally extending the general Section 106 response timeframes. So that's a process of working it out and trying to hope that folks can be reasonable and flexible on all sides. One note as far as the COVID-19 situation as an actual emergency, which can be subject to the emergency procedures in the Section 106 regulations at 800.12. There have been a number of emergencies, formally declared by the president, governors of states, tribes, and other levels of government. And so the ACHP had extended the use of our emergency procedures, which typically apply for just 30 days, to today. And they are going to be further extended until the end of December for projects that are part of COVID response. So things like modifying medical facilities, testing, that kind of stuff, things that are directly related to emergency response for the pandemic. So we wanted you to know about that. And on that, I think Reid may have a couple other comments on emergency response, but we are very eager today to hear from all of you all and how Section 106 reviews have worked during COVID for your tribes, and whether there's continuing stress points that ACHP needs to know about and respond to.
Yeah, thank you, Blythe. I'll just say a few things about the terrible fires that you all are experiencing there and sort of the implications for Section 106. First of all, let me say that the news coming from California about those fires is just truly frightening. And we feel for you, for your families, for your lands, for your resources, for your own well-being. So we hope you are well, and we hope you are safe. We recognize that a great deal of your attentions are being directed toward your own safety and well-being, whether it's because of COVID, whether it's because of fires, other disasters. And so we know that your attentions are necessarily pointed toward those foundationally human things. I did want to acknowledge that we do monitor the sort of the way that agencies and to some extent states and tribes are implementing emergency procedures. Thus far, we have not been told by the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, both of which have extensive land holdings in California, that they are looking to use any other procedures beyond those already in existing programmatic agreements to deal with the emergency response from the fires. Let me just say that the best emergency procedures are usually those that already exist. And so we often say to agencies that when they're developing programmatic agreements and consulting tribes, among others, even if it's for a general management program, that they consider putting emergency procedures into those PAs so that when something like this happens, folks are ready. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we're certainly paying attention to what's happening. Thus far, we have not had any specific requests from agencies or the SHPO or tribes to look at emergency procedures related just to the fires. That's still possible down the line. I would just remind you all that if you have any questions at all about how Section 106 reviews apply to emergency responses, that we've got some great information on our website. We've got frequently asked questions. They're not terribly hard to find, and I'll see if we can either now or later on share with you the link to some of those resources. We also have a free e-learning course that just quickly goes over, it's entitled What Now? Protecting Historic Properties During Disaster Response. And it just lays out who's responsible for what are the priorities, and who needs to be talking to whom. So hopefully those are helpful to you. I would also just remind you, I mentioned BLM and the Forest Service, that we have on our staff liaisons that are dedicated full-time to working with each of those agencies. Feel free to contact those staff people. Bill Marzella is our liaison with BLM, and Anna Perez is our liaison with the Forest Service. If you've got specific questions, please give them a call. We're always happy to help. I think now, I know time is short, so I'm going to just turn briefly to acknowledge some of the work we've been doing on program alternatives, and then I'll turn it back to Blythe for one more topic after that. She's going to talk to you a little bit about our digital information task force. But let me just acknowledge that I think under the great leadership of Chairman Amy Giorgiani, we have been able to demonstrate that the Section 106 review process is appropriately flexible, and that it has, within the regulations, we have the ability to tailor it to specific programs and needs, so that you don't have to go back and look at revising regulations when it feels like it doesn't fit situation X or Y or Z. I think the Section 106 review process's flexibility is one of its hallmarks. And as a result, I think we have done, I think, a great deal of work, and successfully so, at helping agencies use the Section 106 review process to meet current needs: infrastructure, dealing with disasters, COVID, transportation, broadband, you name it. So we've been working very hard to make the process work. I think one of the things that I would just acknowledge is that a number of agencies this year have approached us to talk about tailoring the Section 106 review process to their individual programs. And one of the very popular and most common ways they like to do that is by requesting a program comment from the ACHP. And a program comment is one of 5 types of program alternatives available under our regulations. You probably know a bit about nationwide programmatic agreements as well. That's another type, as are exemptions, standard treatments, and alternate procedures. But sort of the most popular program alternative of the day is program comments. And I won't describe them in detail, but one thing I will note about a program comment is it's a way for an agency to work with the ACHP and states and tribes and others to come up with sort of a programmatic way to carry out Section 106 reviews for a type of property or a type of program. And what's unique about a program comment when compared to the other program alternatives is that they can only be adopted when a majority of our formal members vote to adopt them. So they're the one program alternative that really requires the active consideration and involvement of our members themselves, our 24 members appointed either by statute or the president. So we have been quite busy this year with a host of those program comments. You hopefully have heard a little bit or did hear a bit about our response to the Army, which requested a program comment on interwar era housing, the management of homes on their bases built between World War I and World War II. Hopefully you also saw our request to consult with you on FCC's recent interest in developing a program comment for Twilight Towers. And I think that one has been quite controversial. As I think you probably all know, Twilight Towers have been sort of a long-standing issue with tribes, with states, with you know, our staff and everyone else who has a stake in trying to resolve you know, the issues that were presented when about 4,000 or 5,000 towers were built between 2001 and 2005, not all of which went through Section 106 reviews. So I just mentioned these two program comments, not to sort of take a deep dive in them, but to acknowledge that both have proven to be controversial, and I think both have demonstrated the foundational importance of agencies engaging tribes and states as well, of course, but the importance of them engaging tribes early on as they work to develop the program comments, so that when they request it of the ACHP, it has, you know, they've been able to factor in the views and concerns and interests of tribes. We know and have heard from tribes and other organizations and states that there's a feeling that the FCC didn't quite meet that threshold, that they didn't effectively engage tribes on that, and we take that very seriously. So we are still actively considering FCC's request, and I think I'll just end it there, but I wanted to just acknowledge that we have had a great deal of interaction with states and tribes on these two programs, and I think as a result, we recognize that you know, we all need to be sure, both in the advice that we give agencies as well as the steps we carry out ourselves, that we're really actively getting you know, tribes and states involved in the consultation, and that we're doing our level best to come up with approaches that are workable, even if not perfect, and even if not desirable, that are workable. So I wanted you to know that we're working on those, and there are more to come. We are working with the Forest Service on a program comment for decommissioning excess facilities. They're also consulting with states and tribes and others on several programmatic agreements. We know the Bureau of Reclamation is anxious to move forward with a program comment on their irrigation systems in the West. We know many of which are important to tribes. NASA has approached us about their own facilities. So a lot going on there. I realize it's a lot for you all as well. And I would just simply say, please, when you see the opportunity, whether it's a request from the agency itself or whether it's later on a request from us, please, if you can, get involved in those consultations, share your views, let us know what you think. Now, I realize you're busy. I realize you have a lot to do. And I understand you need to prioritize, but I would just say, if you can make time to share your views on those, they genuinely help us. I also just wanted to acknowledge that that we are looking at sort of revising and improving and modernizing the procedures we use to consider program comments. And so, once we're done with that, we'll make sure, as we're doing that, we'll make sure we get the views of our members and others, but we want to make sure also that when that's done, that you have a chance to look at that as well. So I know time is short. Blythe, let me turn to you for digital information.
Sure thing, and I'll just acknowledge I put a link to our webpage that has basic information about, what are the types of program alternatives, how are they developed, that kind of thing. It doesn't have specifics on the ones that Reid mentioned, but just for general background. We also wanted you to know that this past April, there was a digital information task force that the advisory council members formed in late 2018 that studied how digital information, and with some particular interest in geospatial or GIS information, how that is used to inform Section 106 reviews and federal project planning. And so, that task force was a recognition that the better availability of that information can lead to more efficient planning processes. It can help facilitate the avoidance of historic properties if they're, if information about where they may be located is known in advance by folks who are going to need something like a federal license or a permit for their project. So there's been a lot of interest in that in terms of, the focus on infrastructure and permitting, and trying basically to do better planning and to avoid things by the use of information. So we'll acknowledge that NATHPO was a member of the task force, and we also had input on that from tribal historic preservation offices and the National Tribal Geographic Information Support Center from personnel from there. So those voices were very valued in the effort. And note that the task force recognized that the use of digital tools and things like GIS in cultural resources work is really, that's a huge topic. And so the resulting recommendations and action plan largely call upon the ACHP to be sort of a convener of follow-up conversations and tasks where, we can gather more information and try to bring together the various users of this. We recognize that the ACHP, we are not the data manager. The data is properly managed by states, by tribes, by other entities, not us. So, we can try to have the conversations come together, but we're not here to prescribe. Another important assumption and acknowledgement that the task force made was that, that confidentiality and sensitivity of information is a key factor in these discussions, and that the task force was very, very explicit in acknowledging that, for tribes, releasing information is not the appropriate way to go. Mapping may work for certain kinds of resources, it may not work for others, but still the action plan calls on us to then explore other ways that we can use technology to improve communication between federal agencies and Indian tribes and make that process more effective and efficient without disclosing information that shouldn't be disclosed. So recognize that, security and confidentiality considerations were definitely front of mind in those conversations. So yes, the plan, clearly states that tribes use digital information according to different principles. So part of the ACHP's follow-up is to seek additional feedback from Indian country about how technology can be used to facilitate communication in other ways. And then another follow-up action item I'll just mention is in looking at issues of confidentiality and information security, the task force acknowledged the work of the Cultural Resources Subcommittee of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee. So that's another body of GIS experts, basically, who's been advising the federal government and federal agencies. And they came out with a report about a year ago that, they're the experts in this kind of work, and they had some well thought out recommendations that ACHP decided we would include support of those and try to help assist in any way we can with implementing those by the federal agencies. So yes, another topic where we will, look forward to your feedback and any sort of ongoing input that you have as we explore those issues further.
Thank you, Blythe. And I think that does it for our part. I think we're ready to pass the baton.
All right, thank you, Reid, and thank you, Blythe. And I want to remind our listeners, you can put questions in the question box, and also there's been some comments in the comments. And I neglected to say at the beginning that this is being recorded. Somebody had said they're going to be going back and forth to different meetings and what have you. And so within a week or two after the summit, I'm hoping to be able to take each panel and give it its own individual video so that you don't have to watch 8 hours to find the answer that you need. But with that, I want to pass it over to Valerie Grussing. She's going to give us updates on what's been going on with NATHPO.
Thanks, Shasta, and thanks again for the opportunity to present today. I'm speaking to you from Eastern North Carolina. Really grateful to be able to get out of the house and into a different house for a little while this year. So I do actually have a presentation that I'm going to walk you through today. And let's see, alrighty, let's share my screen. I can figure this out. Okay. So, Valerie Grussing, Executive Director of NATHPO. I have been in this position since the beginning of 2019, so fairly new, relatively. I'm going to talk about some updates for the organization today, and a lot of that includes federal updates. So that's the nexus there, as well as obviously cultural justice for tribes. You'll notice that we have a new logo. We're pretty proud of that, and we have a lot of big changes in progress for the organization. So, sorry, video box is in my way here. So just to make sure everyone's up to speed on what NATHPO does, and also since we have been doing some strategic planning, and we'll get back to that in the coming months, we took a revised look at our vision and mission when I started, and that involved the board, and we'll be moving forward. It seems like folks have settled into our current situation a little bit. We had a slate of board nominees on the ballot ready to roll out in mid-March, and so we didn't want to do that when things shifted, but we're going to get back to that because we have to move forward. We empower tribal preservation leaders to protect culturally important places that perpetuate Native identity, resilience, and cultural endurance. So that's what the organization does. It's a nonprofit organization. We're not a government agency, and it's member-based, but we try to provide support to all THPOs and any tribal cultural historic preservation staff who needs it. And these are the activities that we do that with: guidance to preservation officials and elected representatives, as well as the public, about these kinds of things. And fundamentally, that is intended to promote tribal sovereignty. We do that by developing partnerships, and we advocate for tribes in governmental activities on preservation issues. We're based in Washington, D.C. So one of the main things that my advocacy is for appropriations for THPOs through the Historic Preservation Fund. And we've seen some pretty decent increases, actually. Since I've been here, we've been making a really big ask, bigger than usual. And this year we were able to increase that by $2 million to $13,735. And I believe that went to 194 THPOs. In order to be eligible for that, as you guys probably know, you have to have that agreement in place with DOI and go through the THPO application with the Park Service. So that's one of the things that we'll be taking a look at as far as ways that we can try to help THPOs and potential THPOs with some training for that moving forward. So the problem with appropriations primarily is that as the number of tribes with the THPO increases, the HPF funding for THPOs has not kept pace. So in 1996, which was the first year that THPOs got that funding, there were 12 of them, and now there is a cool 200. We will be celebrating the 200th tribe to get a THPO, and some of our changes moving forward this year. And so a $2 million increase is great, and we're very thankful for it, but it doesn't go very far when it's divided that many ways. Two of the key points that I make when I talk about this on the Hill and in other places are that reconnecting Native peoples to their cultural heritage has the power to help heal deep generational wounds. Rebuilding that foundation that was systematically destroyed, largely by federal activities, that's the work that you guys do, and that's what we need to support. And we need to talk about it in those terms, whether people like to hear it or not. It also generates jobs, economic development, and community revitalization, and it facilitates required reviews. This administration has been all about streamlining, and I don't think many people would argue that there were valid places that processes could be streamlined. That's not what this administration means by streamlining. But nonetheless, these reviews, Nepa and Section 106 and other, are still required, and if THPO offices are funded, then there's someone there who can pick up the phone and do that work, since there are requirements for tribes to do that work. Here's a graph that I made with 3 lovely lines here. So in the green, you can see the total appropriation, and that has steadily gone up, which is a good thing. And then in the gold, you can see that the number of THPOs has kind of tracked it. And so that what that results in is this red line, the average apportionment that THPOs get has stayed fairly flat over the years. You can see the tiny little increase in the past couple of years. So as you guys know, the average amount that most THPOs get tends to be between the $60,000 and $70,000 range to run their entire office, and that's just not acceptable. So we're making a big ask of $22 million this year, which would give 200 THPOs an average of $100,000. And we appreciate everyone's assistance with that advocacy and support, and the letters that you write, and contacting your representatives and senators to help us with that. A couple of things that you're maybe curious about from the past. Last year, a lot of our activity involved this National Register rule, and that's with Department of the Interior and the Park Service. A couple of problems with that were that it oversteps Park Service authority. We contended that they couldn't legitimately really do this kind of thing, and also that it's contrary to the act itself, the National Historic Preservation Act, as well as its amendments. It doesn't do what Park Service was claiming it would do, which was bring the regulations in line with the statute. It would do the opposite. It would also inappropriately impact the role of the keeper of SHPOs and Indian tribes, and it would also harm historic properties and their consideration in the process, as well as the public interest. So some of the tribal implications you can see here. I'm not going to read them all to you, but essentially it would make everyone's jobs harder. It would make tribes' jobs harder. It would make agencies' jobs harder than they already are in trying to consult with you guys on your historic properties, which would be threatened. It would also preclude government-to-government consultation and thereby impugn tribal sovereignty. And then in the rulemaking process itself, they didn't really conduct any real consultation. And so there was that procedural problem, and currently it is being signed by all of the DOI bureaus. I think I have that right. They have a term for it called the surnaming process. It doesn't really mean anything to anybody but them. But and then after that, it will go to the Office of Management and Budget for interagency review. And there are kind of ways that we can still try to continue to have a say in that process at that point. And I will say that I think we've succeeded in creating delays in the process so far up to this point with the advocacy that you helped us do, and NPS and DOI hearing from you all of the ways that this was wrong and requesting consultation. It was really on a fast track as Secretary Bernhardt's sort of top priority when he came into the role as secretary, and we still are here with it having not happened yet. So I think we can all take a lot of credit for that and see some success from our advocacy and actions. And I'm grateful to you all for that as well. The Nepa regulation changes you heard a little bit about from us last year, and just briefly, they would have similar negative impacts on tribes, and not much consultation was conducted in the process itself. They did become final on September 14th. They're slightly different from the National Register rule in that it's just an agency rule and not grounded in statute, is what I'm told. Please don't ask me any more questions about that. I'm not sure I understand the difference. But agencies would next need to modify their procedures accordingly. You know, on November 3rd, if we have some positive developments at the top level, then usually a new administration would go back to the previous 90 days of the old administration and kind of toss out those things that were that they tried to squeak in under the radar at the last minute. Okay, second report in order. I really wish I could close this video box here. Minimize. Okay, minimize. Sorry, technical challenges. This was a huge thing that NATHPO was involved in, and a lot of you guys as well. Here's the official name for the court case that challenged it, and that decision came down last August, not last month, but August of 2019. So I'm going to give you an update on that with some of my time here as well, before talking about the other shenanigans that FCC are up to these days. There were three main parts to it. The first one was exemption of 5G infrastructure build out from Section 106 in a wholesale kind of way. And I break it down into these three main topics because this was how the court decision fell out. And so it was actually a pretty significant victory for tribes on this particular one. So that W is for win, because the court ruled that FCC couldn't just unilaterally make an executive decision to exempt wholesale a category of undertakings from Section 106 review. And second, the FCC eliminated, as you know, tribal review and associated fees, and we actually lost on that point, and the fees decision was upheld, which was hugely impactful for THPOs even before the pandemic started, so it's not been a great year. And then lack of government-to-government consultation, again, that procedural issue, and we actually lost on that as well when the court ruled that FCC conducted adequate consultation on this, which is kind of wild to me. So what's next? That is the $64,000 question. And I bug FCC about it every once in a while, and they say they'll get back to me, and they know that this was all just kind of left hanging. So they need to go back to the drawing board on 5G infrastructure build out and Section 106 review. And, you know, in the meantime, the old process and procedure was reinstituted. So if everyone noticed a lot more requests coming through TCNS, that would be why. And also having now no money to do it. So it was a real double-edged sword with the way those decisions fell out. And FCC knows they need to have a next step, and it's something that you know, NATHPO bugs them about on a pretty regular basis. We want to help facilitate that conversation. There's a lot of people out there with, you know, solid ideas about how we could move the discussion forward and get to a better place that would actually benefit all parties. I think everyone on all sides can agree that the new status quo is not working for FCC, for industry, for tribes, for resources, for 5G build out. And so I'm eternally hopeful, and I believe that we can get to a better place. Again, that may have to wait a couple of months for a big change. And so Twilight Towers is one of the last things that I want to mention so that we can have some time for discussion here. Procedurally, we've got some similar issues here. So this has been a learning experience for me in that this is something that where the ball is kind of in ACHP's court. So it's been their responsibility to conduct consultation on this, although FCC is the party that has to approve a request for an extended timeline. So I'm glad to hear, Reid, that you guys are will be revisiting the program comment process, because we kind of have a lot of opinions on that. It's also been a very short time frame with 45-day notice, especially during this time, during the pandemic, leading up to the election. And 2 group meetings do not consultation make, as you know. So in our letter that we sent, and I believe in our template letter that we sent out to members and THPOs as well, we argue that this is an inappropriate use of a program comment in the first place. The procedure that this is getting, that this is going through is nothing like that of the co-location nationwide programmatic agreement that it would supersede. And so there are alternative solutions that, again, we would like to advocate for and facilitate between FCC and Industry if Possible and ACHP and tribes. That's what we're here for. And this program comment would reward bad behavior by wholesale exempting Twilight Towers built with or without Section 106 review. We'll never know. Apparently, between 2001 and 2005, there are ways that review can be conducted on these towers if antenna are going to be put on them. And FCC's story, ongoing story, that they don't know where they are, nobody does, and we don't know how to find them, just doesn't hold any water if people are going to go and put antennas on them. So that is something that we are engaging as much as possible on, and trying to advocate for a better process and a better solution on that. So looking ahead organizationally, and I'll go ahead and wrap this up here, we're making some big changes and we'll continue to. On the business operations front, we've got a new logo that we're really excited about, a new website, you probably noticed, and that continues to be a work in progress. And those things are intended to improve our communications with you and our outreach. We'll also be creating some virtual training and resources, and have started talking about ways to host a virtual conference. So Shasta, I will be asking you for some notes on how this went in the end. And all of that is intended to improve member engagement and support. We want to increase the number of tribes with THPOs, and we want to increase the number of members in NATHPO. We're all stronger together, right? When we have that bigger knowledge base that's based on your experiences. So how can we better serve your needs is the big question. And all that will lead to, you know, our vision of tangible benefits and success stories. So in the end, you know, our big picture vision for this is that places and resources are protected, getting back to our revised vision statement about Native identity, resilience, and cultural endurance as a result of that. We have a lot of partner opportunities. Some cooperative and cost share agreements with agencies will enable us to do some exciting things this year related to training and consultation on ancestral lands, and helping agencies better serve you as well. And then broadly speaking, I'd like to take a look at cultural landscape approach implementation from some of my past work. And just in general, how we can help agencies take individualized approaches to nationwide issues. And with the role that we have, we kind of have some endless possibilities on that front. And so I'll wrap it up there. Here's my contact information and our website.
Great, thank you so much, Valerie. And I want to acknowledge as well, for those who don't know, that in California, you all chose me to be your representative on the NATHPO board, and then the NATHPO board chose me to be their chairman. So. So that's, you know, full disclosure, obviously I have the interests of NATHPO in mind as well. And want to point out that you do not have to be a THPO to be a member. of NATHPO, and the work that Valerie is doing is important for all the tribes because it's work that's being done on regulations and issues that affect all the tribes. So we are actually doing our membership renewal process right now. So some of you might have received your invoice to re-up your membership, but if you're not a member, you can join. Even if you're not a tribal member or work for a tribe, you can join as an associate member of NATHPO. And of course, the more resources we have, the more work we can do. So, and we do have a comment from Brandy McDaniel. She says, looking forward to virtual NATHPO. And I'm a little terrified because, you know, we're doing the background on this, and it's just basically me and Alexis and Heidi who are doing all the background right now. And this is pretty casual, you guys. I feel like we're just hoping for the best. You know, if screens freeze, or the fact that we can see all the panelists' names right now, and I don't really know how to fix that. We are learning. So I'll be looking for everybody's comments when this is over about ways to improve or what you liked when we get to the end of our 2 days. But in the meantime, I want to know what you all think. Do we have any questions? And so far, I am not seeing any hands raised. Oh, here's one. The question is, how can we get more info on the NRCS agreements? And how does the Farm Bill affect the Section 106 process?
So the first question, we have an overarching agreement with NRCS that I actually inherited, and that was to develop consultation protocols and agreements on ancestral lands, which I was pretty surprised and excited to see. I come from agency land myself, and I had struggled at times to get my leadership to consult on tribal lands, usually in custom areas. So that's pretty exciting as a prospect. And most of the funding was intended to be used for tribal travel to regional meetings. So those had not happened yet. They had drafted a framework document to be used as a framework for that. And I've spent a lot of time and effort this year trying to rework the language of the agreement so that we could actually open that up and use the funding for other things while we can't travel. And so that will be where some of I think our training gets developed moving forward. And we'll, you know, take a closer look at how we can work with THPOs to use some of that funding to actually have you guys help develop that content. Obviously, that's not something that I need to be doing, but rather coordinating, facilitating. So if you want to know more about that, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm happy to talk about possibilities because we're just beginning to figure out exactly what we want to do with that, and we'd love to hear from you guys. How does the Farm Bill affect the Section 106 process? I actually don't know the answer to that question. So
yeah, I think Reid might be able to answer that one.
Do please.
And I don't think I have a specific answer for how the recent or upcoming Farm Bill might do that, but let me just acknowledge that we often work with our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture to sort of tease out from what is an enormous bill. As you know, the Farm Bill is typically an enormous and complicated mechanism, whether there are implications for the Section 106 review process. And if there are, I think then certainly, you know, usually what we see is the Department of Agriculture or one of its component agencies that, you know, is getting something from the Farm Bill will either develop guidance for how it carries out or implements that part of the bill, or you know, in theory, they could come to us and look for programmatic solutions. I'm not aware of that happening recently, so I guess the short answer is so far we've not seen it have direct implications, but it could.
All right, thank you, Reid. There is also a couple more questions for Valerie. Valerie, you're very popular. You have a couple of questions in the question box.
Yep, I'm just taking a look at those now. What kind of legal support would be helpful for THPO advocacy on the rules, Nepa, FCC, National Register going forward. We've had another development in the past year or so that really started with National Register rule. Wes Furlong at the Native American Rights Fund, NARF, out of the Anchorage, Alaska office, wrote such an amazing letter on the National Register rule that I had to find out more about him. And since that time, he has actually been giving us a lot of time and expertise pro bono to help with these kinds of things. And he's just really, really good. He continues to impress me, and he helps with, you know, his legal opinion on what our options might be with all these kinds of these agency things that keep coming our way. Drafting letter language and helping make sure that we are doing all we can as far as options that we can offer to you guys. If any tribes have lawyers that are engaging on this, and I know there are a lot that do, I would also appreciate hearing from you. I enjoy when people copy me on letters that they send so that I can see what your tribe has to say about these things. That always expands my knowledge as well. So I guess that would be my answer about that. How do you plan convincing agencies to acknowledge, consider landscape approach to their undertakings? Again, hopefully we'll have, you know, more opportunities to do that after November. But I was part of a project with NOAA, the Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, and BOEM, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, before I came here, where we produced a guidance document that sort of outlined some ways that not just Section 106 and NEPA intersect, but how some steps could be added and augmented in a fairly simple way that would help consider cultural values in those processes. And I know that ACHP, their Office of Native American Affairs, had also been considering that document and some of the discussions that they've been having too. So, you know, once we get to a place where I can focus a little bit less on business operations and more on content, then that's one of those things that I would like to broaden the discussion, not just with you guys, but with agencies, and talk about some specific ways we can look at actually putting that into practice.
And it looks like part 2 of that question is for Reid. And this question is coming from Patty Garcia at Agua Caliente. How do we engage ACHP in educating agencies on landscapes and getting them to acknowledge them?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Patty. I appreciate it. And let me just acknowledge that I think maybe starting 10 or 11 years ago, both because we recognized that landscapes and sort of better understanding them and factoring them into the Section 106 review process has been and was a very important issue, but also because we had a landscape architect on our staff in the Office of Federal Agency Programs. We worked very closely with the Office of Native American Affairs to develop some guidance, some information, some white papers, if you will, on you know, the importance of agencies acknowledging and understanding you know, that landscapes can be eligible historic properties and that they need to be factored into the process, and that often tribes, of course, have very important connections with those landscapes, connections that federal agencies don't always adequately understand. So we do have a body of information on our website. It's probably a bit buried now, that was generated during that period, but I wanted to acknowledge that it certainly is an important topic. I also just want to be honest that it has been a more challenging topic in the last several years to continue to talk about, because there, you know, I think there's sort of a perception now, for better or worse, that some environmental reviews have sort of broadened their scope, and that perhaps the scope of consideration is too broad. And with those pressures, you know, those concerns and viewpoints from some, not all, but from some, the conversation has been a bit more challenging. I think the direct answer to you, Patty, is by all means, continue to engage our Office of Federal Agency Programs and our Office of Native American Affairs, whether it's on a case-by-case basis or about a certain programmatic solution, or whether you think there's ideas that we should be pursuing on sort of reminding folks of how to consider landscapes. And so certainly contact either office. The one thing I would just say about landscapes is I think that fear drives far too much of the decision-making about landscapes. I think agencies unfortunately fear that if they acknowledge that a broad landscape has significance to a tribe or others, that it means that it's going to stop their project, that they can't go forward, it's going to get inordinately complicated, that there's no feasible way to find a alternative location for a project that is fully encompassed by a landscape. And we work really hard to dispel the notion that you know, understanding and recognizing these is a way of stopping projects. But to the contrary, it's important to inform those projects, to understand what is important, not just about the, you know, sort of the immediate area, but how it's connected to a much broader area. So we do a lot of education to try to, you know, to avoid that sort of fearful reaction. And frankly, I know you all do that every day, and I appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you, Reid, and thank you also, Blythe, for putting more information about that, the link to the ACHP's website for the discussion of traditional cultural landscapes. I'm not seeing any other questions at the moment in the question box. We've got about 4 minutes remaining. But Blythe, I actually do have a question for you when you talk about the use of tech to facilitate communication. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what sorts of responses you've gotten from the tribes on what some of their difficulties might be in that arena.
Well, I think full acknowledgement and disclosure that we are sort of feel like we're just getting started in having those conversations and seeking that kind of feedback. But you know, in terms of looking at communication, because some of the suggestions that were coming out as the task force, and it worked with an advisory group too of folks who had more, you know, kind of technical expertise in this area. You know, some of that conversation brought up ideas like, you know, could we use technology to try to, you know, pair up an agency, say, mapping where their project area is, and then, you know, linking that so they can automatically pull up information about tribes who may be interested in consulting, and then somehow, you know, beaming out a notice or some sort of early information about, you know, to get an early coordination conversation started or something like that. So those were the types of ideas that came up in the initial conversations with the task force, but I think it's something that we want to hear more about, you know, what might those tools look like? How could ACHP play a role in, you know, helping folks bring them about?
Thanks, Blythe. Valerie, I think you also wanted to address Patty's response about BLM in California not applying the landscape approach.
Oh, sure. Thanks. I'm just starting to type. So Patty, thank you for doing that, first of all. But unfortunately, I'm not surprised to hear that about BLM. Most of their regional tribal liaison positions continue to be vacant, I think for years at a time. And so it's obviously not a priority for that agency. And that is something that we have talked about with their FPO as well, who is retired now. So I think, again, we'll have to look to hopefully the coming months to try to re-engage in those conversations with BLM. But I think we will try to make inroads with other agencies first to try to get some traction and some success with that under our belt before we probably take on BLM.
So I'm seeing that people are also talking amongst themselves about this over in the chat. So I will again point our attendees and our panelists over to the chat. Janet Idness says that the Wiyot area tribes that have a success story about protecting cultural landscapes, and Humboldt County's cannabis ordinance. And I think it's tomorrow we're going to have somebody from the California State Parks talking about some of their work on illegal cannabis grows and protecting cultural resources that are impacted by those. And Bill Tripp also says, from Karuk, says that this document helped us use TEK as a reason to manage the landscape. And Bill, I'm not sure which oh, okay, he just pasted the document. I was going to say, what document? So folks, look at that chat. People are putting in links. They're putting in their stories. That's a really great place for resources. And actually, I will shout out to my two helpers, Heidi and Alexis. If you could take note of all of those links that are being shared, so that way we can provide them to our audience when we're done. And with that, actually, we've perfect timing. It is 9:30 on the dot. Thank you so much to our panelists for coming to us from the East Coast. Just FYI, I don't know what your weather is like. It's supposed to be 104 degrees in Paula today. So yeah, enjoy East Coast weather. Hopefully it's not still too hot from all the hot air that was blowing around in the debate last night. All right, everybody, it's break time. We get a 30-minute break where you can check your emails or take take a little walk around the building or whatnot. We will be back at 10 o'clock on the dot. I'll be here a little bit earlier. So please come back in 30 minutes for our next panel with Amy Georgiani of the ACHP, the Traditional Knowledge Paper, and also Sonia Tamez from Saving Our Stories. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.